Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Savannah. If you're new here, if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is May the 11th. It is Tuesday, and today I am joined by Tara Hutchinson. She is with the Alabama Department of Labor, and she's going to give us some news that yesterday came out from the governor's office. She's going to explain a little bit more about that, but essentially the governor announced yesterday that Alabama was going to follow in the footsteps of some other states and end participation in all federally funded pandemic-related unemployment programs. Now, I know that's kind of a mouthful. We're going to break that down here in a minute. There are several programs that are going to be ending next month, June 19th. And I think that the one that is going to affect most people is probably the one that's called the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. That provides an extra $300 a week payment on top of the state's payment of $275. So Tara, I'm so glad that you are here today. Break this down a little bit. This can be really confusing, I think, for a lot of us who maybe don't live in that world and don't live in the unemployment world, or who maybe just started filing unemployment because of what happened in 2020. So first, let's just talk about what is going to stop. We know that the technical terms were federally funded pandemic-related unemployment programs. Mm-hmm. But what does that really mean for the average person filing unemployment right now?
Well, back when this started back in March of last year, Congress, through the CARES Act, created several different brand new programs that were specifically designed to help those who became unemployed due to the pandemic. One of those was PUA, which is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. That program allows for people who would not normally be eligible for benefits to be eligible for benefits. So here we're talking about the self-employed, those who receive 1099s, gig workers, some certain part-time workers, workers who work for nonprofit organizations like charities, like local government workers, things like that. So normally those folks would not be eligible for regular unemployment. And when I refer to regular unemployment, what that means is the state-funded unemployment. This is the unemployment benefits that your employer pays into every year on your behalf, and that goes into a fund called the Alabama Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which is maintained by the U.S. by the Fed, by the U.S. Treasury, and then all of those regular benefits are paid out from there. So that money goes directly from an employer to an employee. That's what I'm referring to about regular unemployment. So to get back to PUA, that's for everyone who is not eligible for regular unemployment. Now, normally to be eligible for regular unemployment, as I said, you're going to be most times a W-2 worker. You work for an employer, you have an employer who's paying taxes on your behalf. So PUA came in and covered all of those people who did not have that. They didn't have a tax base because they were self-employed or whatever reason, they did not have that tax base to draw regular unemployment. So they started on a whole nother column over here that was PUA, and they stayed on PUA all the way through. Now, additionally, the CARES Act also established another program called PEUC, and that's Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation. What that program did was takes those here on the other side that were getting that regular state unemployment, and they exhausted it. So in Alabama, you were eligible for up to 14 weeks of regular state unemployment benefits. So at the end of those 14 weeks, if you were still unemployed, then you could roll into PEUC. So that was just simply an extension. It allowed you to receive more weeks of unemployment. And then if you still remained unemployed when you exhausted PEUC, then those folks could also roll into PUA. So there was two paths to get into PUA. You either started at the beginning because you didn't have that tax base, or you eventually rolled into it because you had exhausted other programs. Now, the big program that you're talking about, the FPUC, the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, when this first started, if you'll recall, that was a $600 per week benefit. The $600 on top of the state benefit lasted through through July of last year. There were a few weeks there where there was no FPUC, and then President Trump had created the LWA program, which provided for $300 per week for a short term. And then at the beginning of this year, the FPUC was reinstated in January, and so that's where we've been getting the additional $300 per week since then. And that $300 FPUC additional payment, that would be on top of any program that anyone was receiving. So if you're receiving regular unemployment, you would get the 300. If you were receiving PUA or PEUC, you would also get the 300. Basically, anyone who is receiving any type of unemployment compensation benefit would also be eligible for that additional $300 benefit. So the announcement yesterday announced that we, Alabama as a state, is opting out of all of those programs. And that also includes MEUC, which is a smaller program. Not that many people are eligible for it, but it provides for an additional $100 a week benefit for certain earners who have mixed income.
So there's quite a few programs that are going to stop next month, and I've got them written down. So I'm going to be looking at those to make sure I get the wording right here. So again, this is all federally funded pandemic-related unemployment programs. We've got the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. I think you call that FPUA or FPUC. FPUC. We've got the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, which is PUA. The Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, which is PEUC, and then that kind of smaller one you mentioned that we don't have as many people who qualify for, which is the Mixed Earner Unemployment Compensation. That's MEUC. So that's 4 programs that are going to be ending next month. June 19th is the last day. So what does that mean? That June 19th, 2021 is the last day of these federally funded programs. What does that mean for the person who is drawing on these programs?
So what that means, if you're currently receiving benefits under PEUC or PUA, your last compensable week is going to be the week ending June 19th. That's Alabama ends its unemployment weeks on Saturdays. So that's going to be your last compensable week. So you're going to be able to file benefits for the week ending June 19th and receive that final pay, which would normally be the following week. That will be the end of your payments. If you are on regular unemployment, again, that's that state-funded unemployment, you will be able to continue to receive those unemployment benefits minus the $300. So if you're WBA, that's a weekly benefit amount. If your WBA under regular unemployment is $275, which is the max in Alabama, you would be able to continue to receive that $275 only until you reach that exhaustion point for regular unemployment compensation benefits. So say on June 19th, you've only been receiving regular benefits for 2 weeks. You would still be eligible for an additional 12 weeks of benefits at $275 only. However, the same would apply if you hit your 14th week there on June 19th, you would also be what's known as exhausted. You will have exhausted all of your benefits.
Are there any exceptions here? Are there any exceptions, any type of situation? We know that everybody's got some type of different situation going on in life, and especially right now in 2021. Is there any exceptions of past that week ending June the 19th, that's Saturday, where you could be eligible still for some of these programs?
No. Currently there are no exceptions. Those programs will end in their entirety on June 19th.
Following June the 19th, say in October, September, I am going to be filing for unemployment. Is the max benefit at that point $275 a week?
Right. The $275 is set by statute. That's set by the Alabama State Legislature. So that's going to be the max state benefit, regardless of what time of year you file. Now that doesn't mean everyone gets $275. The minimum is $44. So you could receive a WBA, a weekly benefit amount of anywhere between $44 and $275. And that WBA is calculated based on your prior earnings. So it's going to be different for everyone.
It will be. Do we have any idea how many people right now in Alabama are depending on these programs and how many people this will affect?
Well, last week, for example, we paid approximately 80,000 people on all programs combined. Now, that includes the regular unemployment, because regular unemployment is also receiving the FPUC, the $300. So we have to count them as well, because even if you're receiving regular unemployment, you're also receiving the FPUC. So you're receiving kind of a mix of federal and state benefits. So approximately 80,000 people received some type of benefit under any one of those programs last week.
And then we know that this has been a record year for unemployment, I'm sure, across the nation. But in Alabama, I think you had mentioned before that there were more than 1 million people who filed for unemployment and for these programs. How much money has the state, combined with state and federal money, paid out to people over the past year?
Since the pandemic began, ADOL has dispersed around $5 billion in state and federal dollars related to unemployment compensation. It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Do you have anything to compare this to?
We actually don't. This was an unprecedented thing that hit all of us across the country at the same time. State departments of labors nationwide we like to say we were hit by a tsunami overnight, and we were. This is very different from a normal recession or anything like that you can generally see coming. You have months and time to prepare. You see it's coming. There are signs. You can prepare for it. There was no preparation. I mean, Alabama was operating at full speed ahead with record low unemployment, record high employment, more wage and salary jobs that the economy had supported than ever before. And then basically within a week, 10 years of positive economic progress was gone. With that $5 billion, we've paid out more in the past year than we have in the last 12 years combined. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, a lot of claims.
And I know it seems like the bulk of that was federal money at that point coming in, because again, that state maximum is set by statute is $275 a week. And that federal money was really bumping up the amount of money people could receive per week. And then, as you mentioned, it was also allowing people who had already reached the exhaustion point of, I believe you said 14 weeks of unemployment. It was extending that a little bit.
Right.
So let's talk about the work requirements now. I know that there were some changes to work requirements, as in seeking work, I should say, requirements over the last year. So what does the person who is filing for unemployment now versus in a couple of weeks when this federally funded programs end for Alabama, what do they need to be doing in order to still receive unemployment regarding searching for work?
Right. Well, it's always been a requirement that someone be searching for work while they receive unemployment compensation benefits. That requirement was waived temporarily during the height of the pandemic. We were given, our secretary was given that discretionary authority by the USDOL, as were all the other states, to temporarily waive some of these requirements that were, because of the pandemic. Think back to March, April, May, June of last year. There wasn't a lot of things weren't open. You couldn't search for work if there was nowhere to work. So it didn't make sense to require anyone to search for work when there was no work to be had. However, that's not the same situation that we're in today. So that requirement has once again been reinstated. Anyone who is filing and receiving unemployment compensation benefits is required to search for work. We require that, and online job applications count, interviews count, in-person job applications count. We ask that question on your weekly certification. We ask you for proof of that. If for whatever reason you don't get that question, you need to be keeping a diary or a journal, a log of some sort, so that if we do come back and ask you for proof of your work search, you'll have that information at hand.
Now, something I think that we had reported yesterday as well is that the state's unemployment rate is actually the lowest in the Southeast right now, and it's at 3.8%. And that is, again, Alabama's unemployment rate that we reported yesterday was at 3.8%. So another question for you about just the fund in general. What is the status of Alabama's unemployment fund after such a record-breaking year?
The trust fund now has about a little over $580 million in it, which is good. That's good news. Alabama was not one of the states that ended up having to borrow money from the federal government to replenish those funds. So we were lucky in that aspect. However, if we had to, we would have done so. A lot of other states had to do that in order to keep those benefits flowing. It's probably you could probably relate that to the fact that we only allow for 14 weeks of regular unemployment benefits, while a lot of other states allow for up to 26. So our trust fund probably did not take as large of a hit as other states did, because after the 14 weeks, people were able to roll into those federal programs, which again are not impacting the state trust fund. Those are all being 100% federally funded. So the state trust fund is in fairly good shape. Thanks to Governor Ivey and her administration, towards the end of 2020, we were able to allocate some of the CARES Act funds to go into that trust fund in order to prevent back-breaking tax increases on employers that would have occurred this year that were directly related to costs incurred by because of the pandemic. Those are known as our shared costs or our pool cost. And basically, those are all costs that can't be assigned to one particular employer. And we had waived that. We had waived those individual ratings for the pandemic in order to keep those tax rates down for the employers. But the money had to be allocated somewhere. So Governor Ivey and the administration were very helpful in helping us to mitigate that cost. We could have seen tax increases of up to 200% on employers had that not occurred, which, as you know, especially with a lot of these small businesses in Alabama, they would not have been able to sustain that. So they would have had to close their doors, and therefore increasing unemployment. So our trust fund is doing fairly well. Again, thanks to the governor's administration and the legislature for allowing us to receive some of those CARES Act funds to help mitigate those tax increases.
I know I asked you earlier if there was any sort of exceptions for people in their situations to get into those programs after the week ending June 19th. And I know that you said no. Kind of related to that, is there a way a person can file for unemployment directly to the feds without going through Alabama? Or does that mean that Alabama, you have to go through the state and just get whatever the state offers?
Right. All unemployment programs nationwide are administered by the states.
Now, I know last year that was a record-breaking year. I think you said more than 1 million claims, more than $5 billion in unemployment money paid out since March. Again, state and federal money. Tara, thank you so much for coming on, explaining this to us. I know that you and your office is going to be flooded with questions between now and the 19th, and probably after that as well. So if we have any, we'll be sure to get them to you. But again, Tara, thank you so much for explaining this to us.
Sure, anytime.
And everybody watching, thank you so much. If you have any more questions, please let me know and I will see if I can get them answered. But otherwise, we will see you tomorrow.